Well, we're going to start with San Diego State. I tuned into the game at 12:30 on Saturday, and I really expected the Aztecs to win this ball game, and it looked good early. They were up 13-0 with 2 minutes to go in the first half. They gave up a touchdown, and then all of a sudden, boom, another touchdown, which I still, to this day, after looking at the replay numerous times, I don't know how they overturned it. Originally, they ruled incomplete on the Utah State wide receiver. Then they, after a timeout by San Diego State, they reviewed it, and they gave Utah State a touchdown. And next thing you know, the Aztecs are down 14-13 at halftime. And that started a blitzkrieg of 41 straight points against the Aztecs. They were down 41-13, and then they scored with just seconds to go in the fourth quarter. It ended up 41-20. There's a lot of questions, and we need a lot of answers. And I want to go through it. First of all, this is the Aztecs' fifth straight loss. I thought they'd beat Utah State. I thought they'd beat New Mexico. I thought they would get bowl eligible. Not going to happen. Second straight year, the Aztecs are not going bowling. They're finishing up against Air Force on Saturday. All of a sudden, Air Force has kind of figured some things out. They're playing pretty good football right now. In fact, Air Force, they've had a couple of very convincing wins in the last few weeks. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But Sean Lewis, first-year head coach, lost a lot of players. Lost 42 players. When Brady Hoke decided to retire or get pushed out the door, I think that was more the case than he retired. I think he retired on the job, quite frankly, because he didn't do a very good job of recruiting. And Sean Lewis and his staff come in, and they're playing, from behind the eight ball. But, this team just has not made progress at all. And I realize they've got a lot of young guys that physically are not strong enough to hold up against good Division I football teams, and even against some of the bad Division I football teams. They're not physically strong enough right now. They got to get in the weight room. They got to get stronger, and they also got to go out and recruit better players. I mean, obviously, there's a reason why Coach Lewis is having to play a freshman quarterback, because the Aztecs didn't do a very good job of recruiting quarterbacks. They didn't really do it under Rocky Long, who I'm a big fan of. But people thought his offense was boring. He decided he didn't want to be here any longer, said he was going to retire, but he's still got a coaching job now. He's been coaching ever since he left San Diego State. I think there was a parting of the ways between Rocky Long and J.D. Wicker. And then J.D. Wicker, in my opinion, took the easy way out by giving Brady Hoke his job back that he gave up to Rocky Long when he took the job at Michigan. San Diego State football, folks, is in dire straits, and it's really at a crossroads. And it's really not Sean Lewis's fault. I'll be honest with you. I mean, could he be doing a better job? Yeah, he could be doing a better job as far as his team's not committing penalties. I mean, what I saw the other day was ridiculous. I mean, penalty. They've had so many penalties, I can't see straight. I mean, that's discipline. And I know Sean Lewis doesn't have a quote unquote offensive coordinator. He's got a run game coordinator, he's got a passing game coordinator, but he's really the offensive coordinator. And I've been thinking a lot about this since the game on Saturday. A lot about it, because I love Aztec football. I grew up in the Don Coryell era, Claude Gilbert. And then there were a lot of, so you'd have a good year here, a good year there. You had a nice run with Marshall Falk and Al Luganville. Ted Tollner had a couple of 8-win teams, 8-3, couldn't get to a bowl game. And then you went through, Tom Kraft era was exciting football. They just didn't quite win. And I always wondered if Tom Kraft would have got that fifth year with Kevin O'Connell coming back and a lot of the things that they were dealing with, if he couldn't have might have been able to get that program going. But then they let him go and they bring in Chuck Long, which was a complete disaster. Complete disaster. And I'm not even going to begin to tell you what was going on in that program. I don't know if one hand knew what the other hand was doing. It was brutal. 3 years of football, a couple of losses to Cal Poly. I mean, you talk about watching some bad football. Chuck Long year was awful. And then, you get Brady Hoke in here for 2, one losing season, one winning year. He takes the job at Michigan, and then you have that great run of Rocky Long. Granted, it wasn't exciting football, but they won football games. And that's what you want to do. At the end of 60 minutes, you want to walk off with a W. Brady Hoke came in here a few years, nothing really. Last year, 4-8. Terrible. And Sean Lewis has to take this over. Then you got all the good players and some guys that probably should have never been recruited to San Diego State to begin with leave. So you lost some good guys and you lost some other guys who were taking up space, but you had to bring in 48 new players. And all those 48 new players, they got to get to know one another by first and last name. And then you got to put in an entirely new offense, an entirely new defense, and you're going to go through the growing pains. And that's where we're at right now. It's frustrating as hell. It's frustrating as hell. This is not Sean Lewis's fault. This is not Sean Lewis's fault. Now, next year at this time, if they're sitting at 3-8 and they're not going to be bowl eligible, then we're going to start having to take a good hard look at Sean Lewis and his staff and what they're doing and how they're doing it. How are they recruiting? How are they cutting down on undisciplined play? I mean, there's so many things to talk about. And, you go back to Saturday. And, the Aztecs knocked out the Aggies starting quarterback, Spencer Petras, with an arm injury. Prior to that, they had knocked out the Aggies' leading rusher, Rasul Faison, who was trying to get to 1,000 yards, went out of the game with 996 yards, didn't come back. And then they bring in their backup quarterback, Bryson Barnes, a transfer from Utah. The guy isn't known as a passer, he's known as a runner, and he absolutely crushed the Aztecs. Check these stats out, folks. He went 13 of 15 passing, 139 yards he threw for 3 touchdowns, and he had 15 carries for 193 yards. He had a 19-yard touchdown run. He also had a 63-yard run. They got tackled, deep into Aztec territory, inside the 20-yard line. But the penalties. Now, here's my big problem with the penalties. They've been a problem since the entire season. I mean, there was a point in the middle of the season where they cut down on them a little bit, but they've been a problem really most of the year. Against Utah State, they had 12 penalties. 12 penalties for 101 yards. On the season, in 11 games, with 1 game to go, they have 103 penalties for a total of 933 yards. This team is not good enough to overcome those penalty yards. And then they're averaging 9.36 penalties per game, almost in double figures per game in penalties, and an average of 84.81, almost 85 yards a game in penalties. You can't win that way, especially against good teams. Now, against bad teams that you can overwhelm, like Texas A&M Commerce, like they did, you overwhelm them, even though you had to play a really good second half because you were in trouble in the first half. But, a really interesting article in Sunday's Union Tribune by the man who covers the Aztecs, Kirk Kenney. I want to read some comments from Sean Lewis after the game. This was right after the game during the post-game interview with San Diego Sports 760. And in spite of the losing streak, the Aztecs are headed in the right direction, Coach Lewis said. Absolutely, Lewis said. We are doing great work here. It's going to continue to move in the right way. It takes time to build something at a championship level. It's really, really easy in society to tear something down. It takes a different group of individuals to build and create. We know that we've got the right people here that are, I want to continue this, doing that. We're going to continue to build. We're going to continue to create, and there's going to be championships that come home in the future to La Mesa. That I have no doubt about. That's what I want to hear. That's what I want to hear. Sean Lewis, I think, is a good coach, and I think he's a good guy. I've not met Coach Lewis, but I listened to him very carefully. I'm sure after one of those first games of the year, he wanted to know who the hell I was because I was down in there after one of their games early in the year and was asking questions. He had no idea who the hell I was. I'm sure he asked Jamie McConaughey, the sports information director, who's that big guy sitting in the front corner there asking me questions. But you know what? I care about Aztec football, and I think a lot of you out there care. I know a lot of you don't go to the games. I know there are a lot of empty seats. I think the pricing was way off when they opened the stadium. San Diego State's made a lot of mistakes when it comes to their football program. I think they've hired a very good coach. I think he's got a good resume, but I do think he's being asked to do too much. And I mentioned they don't really have an offensive coordinator. He is the offensive coordinator. I just think in this day and age, it's too much. I think it's too much. Now, if you had this program in place and you inherited a wealth of talent, I think you could probably do what he's trying to do right now. But there's so many things he has to do on the field, off the field, the NIL. And I was listening to my friends up in Los Angeles on the way to Snapdragon on Saturday night. I was listening to the USC talk show. Of course, they played UCLA, and I'm going to mention that game here in a minute. But they really brought up a very interesting point. And it's all everything I've heard the last 2 weeks is about NIL, NIL this, NIL that. And that's where we're at. That's exactly where we're at right now. And they were talking about Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley signed a contract when he left Oklahoma to take the job at USC. He got a $100 million contract. Obviously, that money to this point has not been very well spent. But they were talking about Lincoln Riley's not really one of these guys who wants to go out and talk to the boosters. I mean, he'll go to the booster functions and shake hands and that, but he's not one of these guys that lives and breathes wanting to go out there and shake hands. He probably wants to sit around and count his money when he's not coaching. And a guy like Sean Lewis, who I've heard nothing but great things about, he needs to be out pressing the flesh, talking to everybody he can talk to about trying to help this Aztec football program. And like I said, I think he's a good man. And I think he will do a good job, but right now it's brutal. It's tough to watch. It's really tough to watch, but I also think he's going to have to, I'm not saying fire anybody. I'm not a big believer in that. When you hire them, you believe in them because they know what they're doing. Now, if a guy's jaking it and not working hard enough, that's a whole different story. But if you hire a guy that has good knowledge and you believe and trust him, you got to work with him and put him in best position to have success, just like you do with players. You got to do that with coaches as well. But I think Sean Lewis right now might be trying to do too much. I don't know how he delegates authority. I'm not there. I don't know. But I'm looking at this day and age, folks, of where college football's at. I don't think he can be the offensive coordinator. I think he needs to hire somebody that he trusts, and that person may already be on staff. But you got to turn over the reins of the offense. Tell them, hey, this is the offense we're going to run. You bring somebody in that has a history with it, and you put it in and you run it and you oversee it. You got to be like a CEO. But I think he needs to branch out, coach his whole team, be a part of it, deal with players that are late for class, discipline problems, guys not working hard, bring them in, motivate them. There's a lot of pluses about this Sean Lewis. I really like this guy. I liked him when they hired him, and I realize now he's swimming upstream. He got a lot of things to deal with, and a lot of it wasn't his doing. It really wasn't. And I'm not trying to take him off the hook, but what I watched on Saturday was embarrassing. And for anybody that's an Aztec who maybe played for the Aztecs, had to be just shaking their head. It's not his fault, though. Next year at this time, they're 3-8. It's his fault. He got to get this thing turned around. But I think he's going to probably, in my opinion, I think he needs to rearrange his staff. And I'm not saying you take the wide receivers coach, make him the DB coach. If you have somebody on your staff right now, they've got, like I mentioned, a run game coordinator and they have a passing game coordinator. Is there one guy or either one of those guys, the guy you'd want to give the keys to your offense to, or do you need to go out and hire somebody? And it's not because Sean Lewis doesn't know how to run an offense. He does. But I think there are too many other things he needs to do as a head coach. The head coaching position is evolving right now. You got a guy like Nick Saban, who was a control freak, and I'm a big fan of Nick Saban, but he had a great program. He had all the best players in the country, and he hired good coaches, and he had to rehire new coaches every year because his coaches would get, poached by other universities for better assistance job or head coaching jobs. But where Sean Lewis is at right now, he's got to build this program. And the only way you build it is by recruiting, and then you have to have retention. I mean, they're going to have to re-recruit a lot of their players. A lot of their good players are sitting around right now going, Christ, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? You have to convince those guys that they want to be here and that they can be a big part of the turnaround here at San Diego State. You know, I listened to Marquez Cooper, and by the way, congratulations. He went over the 5,000 yard mark the other day in college football. That's tremendous. What, 23 guys have done that in the history of college football? He's done it at 3 different universities. Congratulations to him. I listened to him and I listened to Trey White, the young man from down in the South Bay who's having a monster year. And they said, hey, you know, the coaches are doing a good job. We're not doing the job. We're not getting it done. And they put the illness on themselves and their teammates, saying, we're not doing our job. We got to do our job. Guys are being told 3 and 4 times that, hey, you got to do it this way. You got to do it this way. Well, I'm a big believer in coaching. Once you tell the guy at least twice and he doesn't do it, he doesn't want to do it. And you know what you do in good programs? You sit their ass on the bench. That's how you deal with it. The best way to get ball players motivated is by sitting their ass on the bench. But they don't have that kind of depth right now. So, I mean, Sean Lewis is going to have to, when this game is over on Saturday night against Air Force, I don't know if they can beat Air Force. I mean, 4 weeks ago, I'd said, oh, man, they're gonna beat New Mexico. They're going to beat Utah State. They're going to beat Air Force. They're going to a bowl game. Not even close now. They got 3 wins. They can, with a win on Saturday, they can match what Brady Hoke had last year, 4-8. And, you know, again, you got Danny O'Neal, who's a quarterback, and he's going through growing pain. Did a good job the other day, though. Didn't turn the ball over, no interceptions, no fumbles. But again, he's a freshman, and freshmen are going to make mistakes. Sophomores are going to make mistakes. But I'm praying that the Aztecs can get this thing turned around. I'm praying that Coach Lewis can get it turned around because I really like him. I think he's a good man. And I think he's a really good coach. I think he knows his stuff very, very well. He's obviously gone through it. He did a hell of a job coaching Kent State. In fact, the first bowl game they ever won was a team that Sean Lewis was the head coach of. And like the announcer said the other day in the Utah State-San Diego State game, if you can win at Kent State, you can win anywhere. San Diego State has a lot of positives. But I think Sean Lewis has come in. I think he's had to do too much. I think he needs to hire an offensive coordinator who he trusts and can work with. And, of course, he's always going to oversee it. In critical situations, he's going to be the guy making the call on what we're doing on 4th and 1 or 4th and 2 or 4th and 5. Head coach always has the prerogative to call the play in that situation. But the man has to do too much. He needs to go out and talk to all the boosters. I mean, he needs to have 9 days in a week and about 30 hours a day because he's got a lot of work to do. But it was a pretty sad commentary on Saturday watching Utah State, who I don't think is a great team. The Aztecs made them look good, and they rolled 41 straight points and beat the Aztecs 41-20.